Fier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brélade.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Bruville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Ouen. Monsieur le connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Southern. Madame le deputy Labby. Monsieur le deputy Tadier. Monsieur le deputy Luce.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Dublé.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Morel. Madame le deputy Lehegra.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Ayer.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Ward.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Alves. Madame le deputy Gardner. Monsieur le deputy Gorst. Monsieur le deputy Farnham. Madame le deputy Moore. Monsieur le deputy Mezek.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Joseph. Monsieur le deputy Balash.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Coles.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Poré.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Ward.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Miles. Madame le deputy Scott.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Renouf.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Curtis. Madame le deputy Feltham.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Binet. Madame le deputy Jeune. Madame le deputy Miller.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Howe.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Binet. Monsieur le deputy Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Kovac.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Curtis.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Ward.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Wilson.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Andrews.
Monsieur le doyen.
Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait le ciel et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et la puissance de la terre, pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, de la conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit, que toute l'heure de réparation est accompagnée de ta bénédiction. Réussisse au bien et au soulagement du peuple, qu'il te plut de commettre à leurs soins. Car nous t'en prions, au nom et par le mérite de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne. Ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous envoie pas en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car à toi le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité.
Sir, Monsieur le Connétable de la Trinité is undergoing a medical appointment and will be with us as soon as he could. Could be excused, please.
Members content to mark the connétable excusé? Excusé.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Sir, the Constable of St Martin is my lad.
Vous jurez que Madame la connétable de Saint-Martin est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister aux états sans exposer sa santé. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Ouen.
Défaut.
Monsieur le deputy Southern.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Labby.
Sir, Deputy Labby is my lad.
Vous jurez que Madame le deputy Labby est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister aux états sans exposer sa santé. Monsieur le Deputy Thadier.
Sir, Deputy Tajia is delayed because of a problem with the bus this morning. Is it possible for him to be marked excuse until he arrives?
Members content to mark deputy excuse? Excuse.
Monsieur le Deputy Morel.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Alves.
Présente.
Monsieur le Deputy Gorst.
Deputy Gorse is out of the island on state's business.
What's the nature of the state's business?
He's travelling to the United States to attend financial conference.
When on state's business?
Monsieur le Deputy Farnham.
Present.
Oh, right. Perhaps you shouldn't have said what you just said. Right.
Monsieur le Deputy Joseph.
Sir, Deputy Joseph is still malade.
Vous jurez que Monsieur le Deputy Joseph est tellement indisposé qu'il ne peut assister aux États sans exposer sa santé.
Sir,
Les États sont constitués. Yes, Deputy Stevenson.
I wonder if I can apologise that I will be absent from the Assembly later this morning for a time to attend a medical appointment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now resume the debate on the amendment lodged by Deputy War to the offshore wind proposition. Conor St John.
Thank you, sir. Sir, the Environment Minister confirmed in his opening speech that he and all ministers are committed to working with Jersey Electricity and fully recognise the value they bring to the island and will bring to this project. However, the amendment is premature. Having spoken about risk and de-risking in his amendment, I don't believe that the amendment itself recognises the potential serious consequences and conflicts of interest that it could cause and the potential risks it raises. The time to formally define JE's role in any project is at a future point when full consideration has been given. Currently, Jersey Electric have everything in place for the distribution with their existing network. It is hard to imagine that a duplicate network would be created to distribute power around the island. Structured as they are, as one company, I think this could also cause us issues, and work needs to be done in this respect. As Deputy Ballard said, they cannot be both the seller and the buyer. Anyone who's looked at generating solar power on a commercial scale can tell you the challenges there are, and sadly what appears to be disincentives rather than incentives to do this with the current arrangements. There is also the potential risk this amendment could present to JE themselves with their existing suppliers. Jersey Electric pride themselves on their strong relationships with their French partners. Would this amendment strengthen these relationships, or could it actually weaken their position? Given the length of time required to build a wind farm, could this leave us needing to generate our own power on island? So last year, France imported electricity for the first time in a long time. This was due to water shortages during the very hot summer. Water is needed to cool their nuclear facilities. Should they think that Jersey Electric are given an unfair advantage with this amendment, could they choose to stop exporting to us if they have again issues with generating enough power for their own? Yes, there is experience on the Jersey Electric board, with some members holding multiple positions, something we discussed in an earlier debate during the sitting. That in itself could cause us problems, given their own existing declared interest in other energy-based businesses. What will be the response of those organisations that board members are connected to? Could this amendment, if successful, actually destabilise the Jersey Electric board? Sir, as has been stated by most speakers, Jersey Electric are not wholly owned by us. As the proposer of the amendment said, they are mostly owned by us. 62% owned by the island. That means that more than a third is not. The Treasury Minister reminded us that we need to be mindful of the minority, and I don't believe that debating this amendment is actually wise, sir, given the organisation is listed. In closing, like others, I'd pay tribute to Jersey Electric and the team. Yes, they should be thanked for their contribution to the island and their hedging in the past. Yes, they're doing some good work around solar power on island, But, sir, I won't be supporting this amendment and urge other members to vote against. Thank you.
Thank you, Conatar. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? In that case, I call upon Deputy Ward to reply.
Thank you, sir. Sorry, I pick up my screen here with trepidation. I thank all those members who have taken part in the debate. The thing that has struck me so much from the general comments is the inability of those who have spoken to step back and look at the bigger picture of what is being discussed here. Too much of this debate has, in my view, been stuck in the long grass. Fear of losing control because of a minority stake in our most important utility company. I'm disappointed at the jibe from the Environment Minister that Jersey Electricity may well have written my amendment, whereas the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development believes I just made the amendment up. Gentlemen, you're better than that. I remind the members that my amendment is about keeping control of our destiny. The Environment Minister's comments that we only own 62% of Jersey Electricity but have 84% of the voting rights makes it sound like we have a minority stake in the organisation. Do the maths. Would the Jersey Electricity really do something for the 62% that wasn't also in the interest of the other 38%? Honestly, if anything, they'd be in trouble if all they were considering were the 38%. I also remind the Environment Minister that they are not just another partner. I'd hope I'd made that point in my speech. We are fortunate that we have the controlling interest and the expertise in the energy business at our fingertips. I was told after the debate that what's happened in the UK couldn't happen here. I rated Margaret Thatcher, but I'm sure if she could see today the results of the privatisation policy, she'd turn in her grave. We need to learn the lessons of history. Deputy Taddeo brought up the idea of buying out the minority stake. It's not something I believe will be necessary, but we are in a position to do so that if push came to shove. Deputy Balash, I believe, said it would be unthinkable that policy would be developed without the knowledge of Jersey Electricity. That sounds like exactly what is going to happen. I talked about loading the dice. We need to make sure this island's interests are given primacy. Deputy Scott, like so many others, talks of Jersey Electricity as if they're another energy supplier. They are not. Jersey Electricity are an incredibly important strategic partner of this island. If they get it wrong, we can't even boil a kettle. Deputy Miller and Deputy Reniff both spoke about conflicts of interest. Absolutely, there are conflicts of interest, but that's everywhere. I spoke about how conflicted are the major utility companies operating in the UK, and how that conflict has become so untenable that they may even be renationalised. The Constable of St John had reiterated a point made by many, too early, my timing is wrong. Who are the experts in the island? It may be a first that Jersey Electricity helps to deliver policy alongside government. I'm very relaxed with that, given our relationship. What's the alternative? Develop the wrong policy and leave Jersey Electricity to pick up the pieces? The comments around scaring off investors. How? If there's money to be made, investors will come. We just need to make sure that we look out for the people of this island. That's who I worry about. I remind members that investors aren't interested in the well-being of the people of this island. This is a business deal, not a social contract. With Jersey Electricity, we get the best of both worlds. I brought this amendment not just hoping to get the support of this Assembly, but to put down a marker in the sand. The Assembly may be against me, but I believe history is not. This is an opportunity to keep control of our future, to deliver energy security for this island and her people. Let's not squander it. I call for the appel.
A point of clarification, please, sir.
Are you prepared to accept a point of clarification?
No, sir.
The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been rejected. 2 votes pour and 41 votes contra.
Those members voting for Deputies Doublé and Wall.
We now return to the main proposition. Who would like to speak next on the proposition? Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. And I'd like to start by congratulating Deputy Wall and quoting Miley Cyrus. Best of both worlds. That throws back some memories from when my daughter was young, but there we go. So whenever we talk about, I want to get something clear from the beginning when we talk about a wind farm. For those, we are often lobbied by many, many different groups, sir. And for groups who have a very set view on the way the world should be, there's very little I can say or do to change their mind. That's the nature of lobbying. So any group that simply does not believe climate change science, we are not going to convince that this is in any way a good project, because this is not necessary. We can carry on the way we are. And I think that's a very important context in terms of lobbying groups and where we're from. But, sir, there is an unfortunate truth here about this wind farm, and that is the best time to do this was probably 20 years ago. And those brave decisions were not made at that time. We disregarded the notion of looking at renewable energy at that time and the investment that would have been required then. And we then bought into French electricity, which is increasingly from renewables. And so I hope there's not a point of clarification here, because I can't verify this apart from going back through Radio 4 yesterday, I think it was. I was listening to the radio, it might have been this morning actually, Times, it's a relative thing nowadays, where it was said that one day last week 52% of the UK's energy was made from wind energy, offshore and onshore. That's a hugely significant amount, if it's true. It may have been one of the lobbyists from the Renewable Energy Group who owned the wind farm, so we'll take it with a pinch of salt. But certainly, sir, the amount of energy being generated through renewables is significant, both in the UK and across the world. So we have a choice today, and it's a very simple choice. Do we say, we are quite happy to go and look into how we may benefit from this? This is a very general proposition that says, let's look at whether this can work for Jersey, how it will work, and come up with a system to actually develop this. Or do we say now, as we did 20 years ago, no, we're not even going to look at that. It's not for us. That's for somebody else. And so I remind this assembly, this is not new energy. This is not new science. It's actually quite old now. We're picking this up late. The technology's there and it's developing rapidly at a pace. And we either buy into this or get involved in it and look at this, and I think we should do so more rapidly, personally. And I think this should become an issue at the next election in terms of what type of energy future we want for this island. Do we want stability? Do we want access to a generation of energy for this island, or do we not? And our move away from fossil fuels is more than just climate change. If we want to look at the economics of this, we have had the most unstable energy market for many, many years, and it's not going to increase in its stability. Look around the world at what's happening at the moment. In those moments when we sit down and listen, it's really very scary. And anything that brings stability, and anything that brings stability to Jersey, we should not be dismissing out of hand day one when we come forward to look at it. The proposition in front of us does actually very little in terms of detail. It says we will investigate leasing of the offshore seabed that we have access to, and then systems of how we're going to fund that. Personally, and I'm pretty sure we will talk about this as a party, we believe that we should have more say in that, more buy-in to that, because there's more money to be made for Jersey, and there is a social side to this. This is about providing energy for people's homes. And if we can deal with a lot of cost of living crisis by having access to our own renewable energy, making that affordable for everybody, that improves people's lives directly on this island. And that is a social side of this investment. And there are social sides to investment, particularly around green energies and a transition and an equitable transition to renewables. And we all recognise that, but this is a tangible example of how that could work. But instead, we may be sitting here today and saying, oh no, we're just going to dismiss it out of hand. So I urge members to support the proposition as it is, but read it carefully. It is not doing that much, apart from saying we're going to start the process of looking at what we want to do into the future. And that's a very important process indeed. So, and the very notion of, I don't really know how to explain this, the very notion that the energy you produce will be solely for Jersey and it won't go anywhere else. They're not, sir, they're not Jersey electrons, sir. They're not, you know, they have a Jersey passport in order to transmit their voltage with a special stamp on their electrons per coulomb. A little bit of science there, sir. Look around to see, just a little bit. Anyway, so it doesn't make sense. We are part of an energy network throughout Europe and the UK. By being able to generate and supply to that when we don't need it, use it when we need it, that is exactly the way that we should be heading. And we have an opportunity here. So I urge members, let's not dismiss that opportunity out of hand on day one before we've even looked through it. Let's come back later and have the debates, the intelligent, informed, considered debates based upon the principles of where we want to go, on the detail of what comes forward to this Assembly, but that will come forward into the future. That was made clear by the Environment Minister at the beginning of this debate. So I urge members, think carefully and let's give this support and move on. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Jean.
Thank you, sir. So for my first half of the contribution, I'll be responding as Chair of Scrutiny after the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure panel. So the proposition, as Deputy Ward has just said, is about policy intentions for location and scale of development. And this is an in-principle proposition with much more work ahead of us. The EEHI panel mainly reflected on what they would like to see Minister do next in the proposition, if this proposition is passed, to ensure deeper consultation, transparency, and to enable and welcome strong scrutiny. So I'd like to thank the Minister for replying already to our recommendations and laying out his intentions in response to our recommendations. And we welcome this open dialogue that has commenced and hope this will continue. We need a more detailed timeline of proposed dates when further propositions will be lodged to ensure scrutiny has sufficient time to fulfil its necessary role. And we wanted to highlight the concerns raised in the consultation process on the environmental impacts of such a large infrastructure project. And it is understood there will be an extensive environmental impact assessment which must meet international best practice and how it will be carried out. And so it will be important that this is robustly scrutinised. Therefore, the panel recommends a clear consultation roadmap be published outlining the next steps, providing a timeline of key intervals to give the opportunity for stakeholders and the public to engage and express their views. The panel recognised that the biggest unknown is what our direction as an island is, weighing between benefits versus risks. And we've requested that scrutiny be presented with a draft business case at the earliest opportunity to be able to start scrutinising the benefits versus risks of various options and scenarios under consideration. And to remind members that the Scrutiny Liaison Committee has, in principle, agreed to set up an offshore wind review panel to specifically look at the significant amount of work that will be undertaken going forward and to keep asking those questions that many have raised but have yet been answered. As the Minister said in one of our panel briefings, the answers will stem from the level of risk tolerance acceptable for Jersey and for the private sector interested in developing the wind farm. So terms of reference for the review panel will be developed as quickly as possible and a call for membership out before the end of the month. Therefore, I urge eligible members to think about joining this review panel. But I'd like to turn now to a few points of my own. We have a legal obligation to meet our net zero targets, which means our need for more green, clean electricity will only increase. Why I highlight our legal obligation is because not only have there been a number of domestic court cases that have been taken by citizens against governments around climate change in the last few years. A week ago, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that countries must protect their citizens from the consequences of climate change in a landmark ruling that sided with a group of 2,000 Swiss women against their government. This debate we're having is about a long-term vision. It is about placing ourselves into what we need in 10, 20, 30 years' time. One thing we know will happen, even if we continue as business as usual, is that our demand for electricity will increase and we will need to buy 2 to 3 times more than we currently consume. As said many times before, we have been protected from the power price volatility experienced across Europe and the UK because of our hedge contract with the EDF. Consequently, we currently only pay about 20p per unit of electricity, whereas France consumers pay the equivalent of 22p or 25p once the government removes the price cap. And the UK pays over 35p. That means we pay 10 to 25% cheaper electricity than French consumers. Do you really think that is going to last? With the new contract to be renegotiated soon, it is folly to think that Jersey consumers will be able to pay less than a French consumer when it is their generated energy with their tax money going to tax breaks and subsidies to their energy producers. It is inevitable that our bills will keep getting higher. The French also have their own net zero legal obligations and has already been taken to court over non-compliance, and so will be focusing much more on delivering their own decarbonised electricity to their own citizens rather than selling off excess to their neighbours. This again will affect the price. With this single market point, we are and will be exposed to volatile and increasing energy costs, or we could become one of the players. The French are also focusing on diversifying even more of their energy mix and have ambitious plans to build an enormous amount of wind farms, 40 gigawatts by 2050. And this is clearly laid out in their submission to the consultation. And if you look at the map they've published, it circles Jersey, at least 2 sides of our rectangle island. We will be seeing a lot more wind farms from our cliffs, whether we like it or not. The French have only just reversed their policy to phase out nuclear, which means they haven't been investing in their ageing fleet or developing new sites. And the sites EDF have been developing aren't going so well. Massive delays and quadrupling of costs. This has happened in both France's Flamanville 3 reactor and also Britain's flagship Hinkley Point C nuclear plants. We have to remember this when we're thinking about our own energy mix. But we also can't forget there are also still concerns with nuclear. A friend of mine in Belgium works on how to dispose nuclear waste, and he always jokes that he's chosen the best job in the world because he will always be needed and he can charge huge fees for his knowledge because it has continued to be a continual dilemma of where to put nuclear waste. And this will never go away. So even if new facilities are built, then even more waste will be generated and need to be stored somewhere, which also, of course, increases the risk of leaks and terrorist targets going forward for future generations. And also continuing using fossil fuels not only has a huge impact on the climate change, but there is huge environmental risks all the way along the supply chain, and including that when they become decommissioned. Just because most of this happens out of sight of Jersey and affects other communities far away from us, doesn't mean we should discount this huge environmental cost into our discussions and when weighing up what we should do. But Jersey hasn't been immune to this risk. The Amoco Cadiz oil tanker ran aground off the coast of Brittany in 1978, and we had tons of oil and tons of fuel from the ship leak into the sea, causing huge loss to sea life just in one incident. Its impact on the environment was catastrophic. Maybe some of you in this room will remember it. Unfortunately, it was before I was born. But this could happen again. And researching oil spills, I came across a WikiLeaks list of recorded oil spills around the world, and there is an average on 5 to 6 a year, causing huge environmental damage. Only recently there has been one in the Caribbean that still is unknown who actually owns that, because it was a barge overspill and it's having huge effects on some Caribbean islands and into Venezuela. So offshore wind farms can have both positive and negative impacts on the environment and local communities as well. So their development requires careful planning and analysis through a process which cannot be rushed. But without a robust environmental impact assessment, banks will not lend money to fund projects, and without that, they cannot be built. So Jersey will have to follow a process that meets global best practices. And as the letter from the French government says, there are many complex challenges, particularly in management of marine resources, preservation of biodiversity landscapes, cohabitation with other maritime uses such as fishing. And so learning from their experiences and leaning on what they have done with Sambria, for example, will hopefully inform a solid expert-led environmental impact assessment for Jersey. And our Jersey can also dictate what fiscal, environment, economic and social benefits we want from this large infrastructure project. These benefits can be realised through setting out clear objectives in the government policy, enacting them through a framework of legislation, regulation and agreements required to underpin a project. And this is for us as state members. This is for us to decide what benefits we want from this project. It is for us to decide. The most important is to safeguard local benefits. Too many large infrastructure projects funded by private sector around the world have been able to negotiate away the local benefits. There are many examples to pull from, and the government needs to ensure it's doing its due diligence. It is clear about the rules of the game, with open and transparent consultations, and develop strong mechanisms to protect Jersey from unintended consequences and the private sector not complying with its commitments and obligations. But what is most important, sir, is to build trust. Trust that we as Assembly support in principle this process. Trust that the government has the capacity to develop necessary safeguards, consistent public policy, clarity of permitting and consenting processes, and expertise to ensure Jersey gets the best of any deal, and trust that Jersey can build partnerships that will withstand any turmoil and make good decisions on risk tolerance, whether that be with our neighbours, the private sector, local stakeholders, or financiers. Jersey's future is a decarbonised electricity system that is more sophisticated than it is now. This is about starting that journey, not placing our heads in what happens now, but what the future will have to be. More decarbonised electricity, more mix of renewables, battery storage, new consumer behaviours, and our homes and cars being more net contributors. And of course, most important, that we also ensure that we are more energy efficient as well. Thank you.
Deputy Dublet.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to follow the previous speaker who brings a wealth of knowledge, and I feel like I learned a lot from that speech. So I will be supporting this, and I will be supporting it on the basis of my commitment to children's rights. The UNCRC states that children have the right to a healthy environment, and so we have a duty to provide that for them. We are even more so compelled to do this following the UN General Comment number 26, which was issued in August last year. And this focuses on children's rights and the environment with a special focus on climate change, and explicitly addresses the climate emergency, the collapse of biodiversity and pervasive pollution, outlining countermeasures to protect the lives and life perspectives of children. It specifies that states are responsible not only for protecting children's rights from immediate harm, but also for foreseeable violations of their rights in the future due to states' acts or failure to act today. And in my view, sir, this should compel all members to support this proposition. Our children deserve to have a future on this earth, and it is our actions that will decide what that will look like. Please support the Minister's proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Balash.
Sir, unlike previous speakers, I find myself deeply agnostic, if not sceptical, about this proposition, supported by a rather thin report, which states that the possible benefits are environmental, economic, and strategic. And it was that last element, the strategic element, which caught my attention, because I remember as if it were yesterday the infamous remarks of a French minister of the sea threatening to cut off Jersey's electricity supply on the misunderstanding that French fishing interests were threatened. If we were to gain energy security, that would be a very powerful reason, in principle, for supporting the establishment of a wind farm near the Minkies. but the more one reads, the less certain one becomes that the intention is to land any electricity in Jersey. The government's feasibility study itself states that it is more likely that the electricity will be landed in France. If that is the case, what is the point? We would be engaging in a highly risky enterprise involving engagement with huge commercial interests way beyond the power of this assembly. And the possibility that at the end of the day, Jersey might be left to clear up the mess by decommissioning the engineering detritus. I, sir, would like to be assured by the Minister in his reply that there is still a desire to gain energy security. For my part, it is close to being a make or break issue. But perhaps I can press that a little further. I don't, sir, wish to be kept in the dark about where the cable will land until we are so far advanced down the road that it is, practically speaking, impossible to withdraw. If this proposition passes and work proceeds on a law to give planning consent and an option for leasing the seabed is developed, I would like some clarity on whether the landing site will still be uncertain at the time when we are asked to commit to a lease. As I say, that this is probably, for me, a bridge too far. And I would want the option to be conditional upon a commitment to land a cable and at least part of the power in Jersey. I am, sir, however, in the generality, reassured by what the Minister has said, that the adoption of this proposition is not to be taken as some form of approval in principle of a wind farm. It is, in the words of the proposition, an agreement to pursue the opportunities arising from the development of a wind farm. In short, it is an agreement to carry out the work which will enable an informed decision to be taken in due course. For my part, I think that the obstacles are substantial. Economic obstacles, environmental obstacles, and strategic ones too. But with those caveats, I am content to support the Minister's proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Brenneth.
Thank you, sir. The Minister for the Environment made a strong speech, clear about what the vote is and is not about. And I also want to acknowledge thanks for his acknowledgement about the work of the previous ministerial team. I agree with his central point that this is about whether or not we go to the next stage. But I intend to take a slightly different tack in this speech because I also think it is important to remember that something big is at stake. The potential opportunity is huge, and I want to talk a bit about that opportunity. This is a vote that asks us to use our imagination. It is about imagining what might be, about weighing up risk and reward, having a vision about what Jersey could be in the future. So let me try and create a picture of what the future could look like, one possible scenario. Let us put ourselves 10 years into the future and picture this scene. The Chief Minister and Deputy Chief Minister are sitting disconsolately down at El Tico, looking out to sea. In the distance, they can see Guernsey's wind farm beginning to take shape. A second French wind farm is also under construction behind Larocco Tower. A supply ship is chugging from St. Peter Port to the French wind farm. Whilst closer to shore, another ship is laying a new cable to bring electricity from Guernsey's wind farm to Jersey. In the Chief Minister's hands is a press release from the Isle of Man government announcing the imminent opening of their 2 gigawatt wind farm, including exports to the UK and Ireland. The Deputy Chief Minister turns to the Chief Minister with head in hands and asks, "Where is our wind farm? How did we miss out?" The Chief Minister lets out a world-weary sigh. We remind ourselves of that fateful day in 2024 when the states voted not to proceed with a wind farm. So I guess that's one scenario that could materialise. Jersey misses out whilst others cash in. But there is another option, and I'll come to that at the end of my speech. So there are many forces that will shape the future of Jersey, shape the island that our children and grandchildren will inherit. Many of those forces are beyond our direct control: genetic modification, artificial intelligence, geopolitical destabilisation. None of these are likely to be significantly influenced by Jersey, and so we will have to adapt, as we always have, as technology, politics and business move on. So for me, one of the strongest arguments for a wind farm is that it gives us the opportunity to take control of one significant part of our future. Jersey has always been good at taking advantage of the hand that nature has dealt us, whether that be farming on soils enriched by Ice Age wind-blown dust, or by leveraging the political power that comes from our geographical location on the front line of Britain's long conflicts with France. However, our physical resources are limited. We have no metal ores, no coal or oil, and so we have been importers of all these commodities. Now we stand in a different position. It turns out that nature has given us a helping hand after all. To the southwest of Jersey, the prevailing wind blows strong, as we all know. The ocean is open all the way to the eastern seaboard of the Americas. Not only that, but the sea is shallow. These are ideal conditions for one of the great economic growth sectors of our time, offshore wind power. And it is growing at great speed. Globally, installed capacity is growing at well over 10% a year. So the truth is that thanks to our geography, we happen to have at our disposal one of the most sought-after resources of the 21st century, a source of zero-carbon electricity, clean energy. The basic resource on which the economy of the future, and therefore the lives of our children and grandchildren, will be built, on our doorstep. The question is, how should we respond to the good fortune that accidents of nature have delivered into our hands? Which brings me to the proposition before us. It asks us that we as an assembly agree that we should pursue the opportunities that a wind farm of up to 1 gigawatt may provide, and to prepare the next stages in that process. This is not, as many have remarked, the final decision point. It may not make the greatest rallying cry of all time, but forward to the next stage and onward to law drafting is basically what we are about. The final decision point is still some way off. And I should say, in all honesty, that I do not know myself that I would support that final go-ahead. I agree with the Minister. It will depend on the details. What kind of a deal do we have? How much benefit do we get? At what cost? But what I can say unequivocally is that yes, I am in favour of the principle of an offshore wind farm, assuming that we can make it work for Jersey. And when I look at the feedback from the consultation exercise, that's what I get from the report. Yep, the public say, we like the idea. Yes, we want more detail. We'd like to know more about how it will benefit the island. And if we're worried, it's mostly because it might have a negative impact on the local environment. But strong support for the basic idea. So let me look a little more closely at the arguments against the wind farm. The one that comes up time and again is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We already have cheap, low-carbon electricity. Why would we mess with that? The answer to this question means returning to my point about looking into the future. Because, as Deputy Jern said, the trouble is the status quo is not an option. The current contract between JE and EDF is up for renewal in a couple of years' time. And already the electricity market is very different to when the previous contract was signed. JE's current deal was negotiated in an era of surplus French nuclear electricity, which meant JE got a good price. Those days are gone. A combination of a decline in French nuclear output as the power stations of the 1960s ran out of time, plus the war in Ukraine, which has meant that the whole of Europe is after low-carbon electricity to replace Russian gas, means that prices for French electricity will surely rise. Therefore, the relevant comparison is not the cost of power from a Jersey wind farm versus today's JE contract, but with the future cost of French electricity. And we can be reasonably sure that electricity from Jersey's wind farm would be cost competitive with French electricity in the future for one simple reason. The French are building wind farms too. As we've heard, they plan to build up to 40 gigawatts of wind power, including another wind farm off the west coast of Jersey in the next 25 years. In other words, in 10 years' time, a contract with EDF will be, in significant measure, a contract to buy French wind power, because that is much of what they will be selling. So we can buy French wind power, or we can buy our own wind power. Either way, it's unlikely we'll pay more for electricity from our own wind farm than we would if we were buying power from France. Now let me turn to this question of whether power is beached in Jersey. I know there are some who've argued that it may not be a good idea to bring electricity from a Jersey wind farm offshore in Jersey, because it adds to the expense. I agree with Deputy Balash. I think we should try and beach power in Jersey. It would give us greater energy security in an uncertain world, and that is worth a lot. Put bluntly, we do not know who will be in the Elysee in the future, nor can we predict with certainty the state of EU-UK relations, both of which might impact on future energy supplies from France. The positive case for beaching power in Jersey is strong. It does not give us and will not give us energy independence, but it would give us much greater security. In a world of huge uncertainties, having control over a significant portion of our energy supply would be a strategic benefit for which I believe we would be very grateful. As an aside, what's more, a cable to Jersey need not add much to total energy costs in Jersey. JE will have to replace one of their 3 cables to Normandy in the next 10 years or so. So with careful planning, that money, which will have to be spent anyway, could be used to fund the cable to the wind farm from Jersey, which could then be used to import from France, as well as carrying power from the wind farm to Jersey. So I think we should try very hard to try and beach power in Jersey. What of the other arguments against the wind farm? The public is rightly worried about the impact on wildlife, on seabirds and sea mammals. This is precisely, of course, what the next stage of the process will deal with. I would just make these points. It's interesting, the point about birds being killed by wind turbines. The key comparison here is not whether they will be killed by wind turbines. I expect some will. It's probably unavoidable, although far fewer than the lurid headlines you sometimes see. And what's more, the designs of wind farms are getting better at reducing bird strike. The key point is that wind farms displace fossil fuels. And fossil fuel production kills far more birds than wind turbines. The production, distribution, and consumption of fossil fuels all involve the death of birds. And by the way, the same point holds for the argument that a wind farm involves concrete and steel, which creates a carbon footprint. Again, yes, but far less than oil rigs and tankers and pipelines and refineries. As for fish and sea mammals, these days, clever design means wind farms can be a net positive in terms of marine productivity. Yes, there is disruption during construction, but the latest work says that fish come back, and in greater numbers than previously, because the jackets on the seabed essentially become reef structures. And in terms of fishing, that can be a net positive as well, because Fishing is not banned around wind farms these days. Bottom dredging is to protect the cables, but there's very little of that by our fleet out in those waters. The visual impact, of course, is unavoidable. A wind farm will be visible from the island. The design can, to some extent, mitigate that in terms of how you align the turbines and so on, but it is unavoidable. But, of course, we can see a French wind farm or other already. The choice really is between, do we have a visible wind farm that we benefit from, or do we have visible wind farms that we don't benefit from? So let me finish as I began, with a vision of the future. What kind of story do we want to tell about ourselves? What kind of island do we want to create for our children and grandchildren? Do we want to embrace the net zero future, or do we want to be dragged there reluctantly? To me, a Jersey wind farm could be part of something bigger. It is an opportunity to change Jersey for the better. I like the idea of Jersey playing a significant role in creating a more sustainable future for the planet, because any wind power we generate will displace fossil fuel. But just as importantly, more importantly, a wind farm would symbolise Jersey's commitment to a sustainable future for islanders, sustainable environmentally and economically, more attractive to business, more attractive to creative, talented and entrepreneurial people. But you don't have to believe in any of this to vote for the proposition, because a wind farm would also be a straightforward piece of economic diversification. It's economic development without needing new fields for building. It's a future beyond finance for our children. It's support for jobs in ports, infrastructure, training. It's greater energy security. So let us imagine again a scenario 10 years in the future. In this scenario, the Chief Minister, indeed all States members, are at La Collette for the official opening of Jersey's wind farm. Nearby, another new facility is taking shape. Jersey's first green hydrogen producing plant is being built. The hydrogen is destined to fuel a new fleet of zero-carbon, non-polluting ferries and aircraft. Government ministers are in celebratory mood, ready to market Jersey as an eco-friendly, low-carbon jurisdiction, not just doing its bit for the environment, but nurturing new economic sectors attracted to the supply of clean energy, creating high-value jobs in a diversified economy, proud of the island's growing reputation for sustainable economic growth. The Chief Minister gets ready to make a speech, thanking all those who made it happen. Just before he stands up, as an afterthought, he turns to his deputy. Who was that short-lived Environment Minister who kicked the whole thing off? Name escapes me. No, I can't remember either, the Deputy Chief Minister murmurs, but I think he used to work for the BBC. Sir, the wind farm project has been on the runway for a while now. Let's at least see if it can fly.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. So many members have already spoken well on this proposition that I have little to add. Recently, the JP featured an article regarding this proposition. It argued if it were not for international policy or treaties, wind farms would not be built as fossil fuel production is cheaper. So this ignores the reality of international agreements favouring renewable energy to reduce fossil fuel burning. It's like saying if we did not have police, the cost of policing would be cheaper. Deputy Rob Ward suggested that this proposition should have been debated 20 years ago. History will probably indicate these international treaties should have been made more than 20 years ago too. Even if relations with France continue to be cordial and manageable, electricity demand is expected to triple globally by 2050 as a result of transitioning away from the burning of fossil fuels. At the same time, Jersey, like other countries, has committed to reducing its own consumption of fossil fuels. Jersey currently imports nuclear energy from France, which is cheaper than renewable sourced energy. This is not regardable as offsettable clean energy for the burning of fossil fuels under international treaty, I believe, owing to the radioactive nature of nuclear energy waste. So we will need to import renewable source energy ourselves down the line, and it does cost more than nuclear energy. But do we want to build our own nuclear reactor to look to other countries to do so, whose problem should the management of nuclear waste be? And as has already been mentioned, there has been massive expansion of wind farming in France already to meet its own treaty obligations. To what extent can Jersey reasonably expect France to keep expanding these or building more nuclear power plants on its own territory to supply us with electricity to meet our own treaty obligations, while Jersey exercises a policy of NIMBYism? Or to expect a country like France not to prioritise its domestic market over exporting to places like Jersey? Our additional electricity from renewable resources will cost more, which will need funding, in addition to the cost of supporting an ageing population, a number of whom cannot afford to support themselves, along with the cost of training our population to adapt to new technology and the cost of government acquiring new technology. The proposal of leasing the seabed to support renewable energy production offers to help pay for Jersey's future economic and energy needs. Decommissioning is covered by the proposition itself. We need to be clear, this is more than a proposition for government to create a feasibility study. This is direction setting, with details yet to be filled in. So I have a slight difference with the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development regarding our perception of the attractiveness of wind farms. I already have a few of wind farm turbines. I regard them as industrial machinery. But what is being proposed would be far less intrusive on our own coastal views than wind farms already constructed in many areas of Europe and in the UK. Jersey needs to do its bit. For those who point to China and say, China should be doing more, China has invested in much renewable energy already and its own plan to manage its treaty obligations in light of the size of its own population, which is so much more massive than Jersey's. I'm mindful of the concerns of our fishermen. There remains work to be done to create a level playing field with the French fishermen in fishing in each other's territories, I suspect. And I hope to work with the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development and other relevant ministers in supporting our fleet. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Conor Tarb of St Saviour.
Thank you, sir. I will be brief, sir. I won't repeat anything that's been said previously, sir. This is an in principle proposition, so I think we need to explore this. We already have many cables. We have at least 3 cables running to Normandy already, so landing on island wouldn't be a major problem. In my previous iteration, sir, as a minister, you can imagine the conversation I had with the then Senator Farnham, who was then heading up tourism, that I may need to close part of Greve de Lec for 3 months during the summer to lay a new cable there. We did it with the minimum of disruption. So a very large cable was laid to Guernsey. So we do have lots of on-island infrastructure already handling that. I've always believed in security for the island. I'm not a flag-waving environmentalist. I'm not trying to save the world, just the island for now. I believe that we should have more resilience. We know what it's like when we have a bad storm and the boat doesn't come in, that fresh food disappears off the shelf. That we need resilience generally with food and fuel, being electricity and whatever. Should we lose the link to France, obviously the JEC can self-generate on island, probably just for a matter of months. Then obviously the fuel tanks would need to be topped up. But if we want to be cleaner and greener, then this is the way that we have to go with renewables. But I'm also very aware that we have
instability around the world. I know that France, I believe half of their nuclear reactors are under maintenance at the moment, and I think France is struggling to keep the supply up to the whole country. We're aware of conflict in Eastern Europe, not to mention the Near East, Far East and beyond. Things are very unstable. So I believe the island must be resilient as possible. And I would like the idea, as has been suggested, of landing a cable in Jersey as well as France. I'll leave it there, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin Tarr. Over to Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. If done in the right way, the wind farm could bring many opportunities to the island. We could benefit from security in our power supply, stable pricing, clean energy, tax and leasehold revenues, and employment opportunities, depending on the contract. But there are also valid concerns. I'll mention 3 of these now. Firstly, I ask that there be serious consideration given to compensating local fishermen whose catch is affected during the building process, operation, and decommissioning of the wind farm. I understand that this is fairly normal practice by consortiums in other jurisdictions. Secondly, if the seabed lease model is the chosen way, I also ask that serious consideration be given to the establishment of community bonds, allowing Jersey people, companies, and or our own government on behalf of the public to invest in a stake in the wind farm, should they so wish. To minimise risk, this should only be available when the wind farm is operational. This would also not prevent a private consortium from the seabed lease model, allowing a small percentage of outside ownership of the value of the wind farm, with very small risk to the public. Thirdly, but no less importantly, is the subject of biodiversity. Any adverse impacts evidenced in the environmental impact assessment must be addressed as well as they can be, with consideration given, for example, to the building of artificial reefs or any other biodiversity offsets. The success of this project for Jersey will very much depend on the contract. Should this project go ahead, we must ensure that there is clear benefit to the people of Jersey while ensuring all risks are fully addressed in the contract.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Tadia.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for what's been I feel like I'm summing up, what's been, I think, a thought-provoking speech up until now, and I think it's good to see the new Environment Minister, who's taken a period of time to reflect, come into government, and then decided, after being briefed, and I know it's an area he's been interested in anyway, decide to keep on the work that's already been done. That's, I think, good constructive politics, and we need to see more of that in future. It's difficult to know where to start with this, and I will start with some personal comments, and then I suppose similar to Deputy Jeune, make some comments on behalf of the panel, because we have thought about this quite a lot and issued a comments paper as well. And the first thing that I came across when doing some initial research, when typing in wind farm into the state's website, State Assembly website, was I came across a proposition from 2005 that had been lodged. And if I just bring that up, it was quite interesting because I'd not known about this, and I suppose I wasn't really following Jersey politics very closely in 2005. I would have been out of the island. And there was a proposal lodged by the Policy and Resources Committee in February 2005, which said to agree that the French government be requested to consult with the island authorities on the proposal to construct an offshore wind farm in French territorial waters off Saint-Rémy, Deslandes, Normandy, before any final decision is taken. And there's probably only 1 or 2 members of this current Assembly who were there at the time and remember that debate. We'll ask Deputy Southern when he comes back in if he remembers that debate. I'm sure it's very vivid for him. And the interesting thing is, when you look at the proposition, you realise how outdated it sounds in a lot of ways, because it starts from a point really of a great deal of scepticism, and essentially I think there is an element of NIMBYism in it, and also we look at the scale of energy being developed or proposed to be developed by the French, and we realise how fast and how quickly technology has moved on in the space of less than 20 years. So what they were proposing back then, and what the report says, is that the actual scale of the proposed wind farm is considerable. It is understood to consist of a plan to generate 80 megawatts power from 20 to 23 wind turbines, with a hub height of 90 metres above the mean sea level, and rotor blades a further 60 metres in length. And of course, what we're proposing today in our blue sky thinking is much more than that, of course. It's more than 10 times the capacity of that. And the comments that we hear from the committee is that the possible effects on aviation are of a particular concern due to the height of the turbines, which would clearly be a hazard to aircraft flying at low level and would require a restriction area to prevent collision. And the turbines would need to be conspicuously lit with flashing strobe lights for safety reasons. I'll leave that there, but essentially the tone is one of, I think, scepticism. And if only, I guess, we could have had a slightly different conversation with France back then, saying, we noticed that you're rolling out wind farms, and we actually think this is a really interesting technology. We use electricity ourselves, strangely enough, as an island, and we already buy electricity from you. And then it got me thinking about the opening comments, and we've heard them before. We've heard the comments in the past about what's the best time to plant a tree. It's 20 years ago. The next best time is now. I also know it's slightly different with energy because, of course, as technology evolves, actually it might be that now is the best time to invest, not 20 years ago, because it's more feasible and it's more viable to do that now. So whatever the right time is, I think that's also an interesting consideration. And I look back at maybe an environmentally sustainable energy source that we know from our own experiences not so far away from us, which is the barrage de la Rance, just between Saint-Malo and Dinard. And that was opened in 1966 and it was commissioned in 1963. And I've got some statistics on that briefly if anyone's interested. So the barrage generates 240 megawatts, and the output from that barrage in 1 year is 500 gigawatts a year. I hope those figures mean something to somebody. And the next thing I would note then is that the Rance has been generating electricity, the barrage, for over 50 years now. And who owns the barrage de la Rance? Who built it? Who owns it? It's the EDF, it's Électricité de France. Who owns Électricité de France? The clue's kind of in the name. It's France. The French state own it. And therefore, who gets the benefit and the financial benefit from that? It's ultimately the French state and, of course, the people of France. And so I would hope that in maybe 50, 60 years' time, that Jersey is in a similar position where it also has its own energy supply which it can generate. And who knows, maybe sell to the north or sell to the south or to the southeast of our island. But of course, that does need the preliminary work to be done in the first place, which is what's being proposed by the Minister. I've been here a long time, but I've just realised how inopportune these desks are, sir, to using a laptop and reading off it at the same time. I think I'll turn to the comments that I would like to make on behalf of the scrutiny panel before perhaps giving some final considerations, and I'll talk to the recommendations. So we've made 4 recommendations. Members are, of course, at liberty to review the comments paper that we've issued if they haven't done already. Recommendation 1 is that should this proposition be adopted, the Council of Ministers should clearly outline the level of prioritisation it places on each of the potential benefits of the offshore wind farm project, and this should be completed prior to any further debate or by December 2024. The second recommendation we make is that a clear cost and risk benefit analysis of offshore wind should be produced prior to any further debate to allow sufficient consideration by scrutiny and the Assembly. I'll just talk to that point very briefly. I suppose if we are to be the critical friend that the Assembly wants us to be and that government expects us to be, is that one of the criticisms, I suppose, is that this particular proposition doesn't talk a lot about the risk profile and the possible risks that are associated with the development of the wind farm. But we obviously also accept that this is an in-principle decision and it is simply to take us to the next step. So we're not being overly critical when we say that in the comments, simply that, of course, at every stage of the decision-making, I think it is important that members and ministers are mindful of what the ultimate benefits and the potential risks are of any project, including of any involvement that the states or the government may have as an owner or shareholder in that. Recommendation 3, and there are only 4, should this be adopted, confirmation of ongoing ministerial roles and responsibilities within the offshore wind farm project should be provided to scrutiny and states members, and this should be done within 6 weeks of the successful adoption. We obviously hope that's acceptable to ministers. The real driver for that is I think it's really important in this, whilst it is a collective project in many ways of the Council of Ministers, presumably backed by the Assembly later today, I think it's quite important, and we think it's quite important as a panel, that there is a clear line of responsibility as to who is driving the project. It may well be that it's the Minister for Environment, it might be the Minister for Sustainable Economy. They may disagree, they may say that it needs to be a joint project, and we'll listen to their arguments, but on balance at the moment the panel thinks that it's important we have that clarity of direction, and I would say also at some point the clarity of vision, because I think the proposition, if you're being critical, you could say that it tries to be all things to all people, and I think at some point it needs to be clarified what the main driver of the wind farm will be. Is it environmental? And if it is environmental, I would suggest that there are many counterfactuals which we also need to consider, because I think there are lots of ways that Jersey could decarbonise very efficiently if the government and the political will were there, which didn't involve the construction of a wind farm. But we know that there are other benefits which are more than fringe benefits, which involve the future economy and more sustainable energy, not just in Jersey, but regionally and globally. And the fourth recommendation, sir, is that should this be adopted, the relevant ministers should ensure that future consultation on the wind farm project provides information about both benefits and risks. So again, similar to what's previously been mentioned, in such a way as to allow informed views to be expressed. Okay. I'm just going to give some personal thoughts now, I guess, if that's okay. I'll do it all within the 15 minutes. It's great. You get to wear 2 hats, but you divide your time between both. Some of the comments we hear, I think, are absolutely valid. I had a call yesterday from a constituent who knows a lot about energy, and he's not one of those who's typically, I say, eco-sceptical. He's talking very much about the future of tidal power. And I suppose one of the considerations that we all need to bear in mind, and I think the minister should be and would be aware of, is that, like I said at the beginning of the speech, technology moves on so fast. And one of the risks is what happens if we get to a certain point where we've invested a lot of energy and time, or someone's invested a lot of money in the construction of a wind farm, to find out that in 10 years, just as the wind farm's opening, that a new form of technology has arisen, and that actually now tidal power is more cost-effective and more feasible than a wind farm. I guess that we could argue that we're not reinventing the wheel, and that that risk has already been taken on by other countries. And so the way I would look at that, of course, is the fact that the wind turbines will still be there and they'll still be generating free electricity. I do think we need to be mindful of that, and certainly that's what some constituents have been telling me about their preferences for tidal. I don't think it's an either-or, and I do accept the evidence that we've had from ministers that at this point in time, wind energy is the most feasible and the most viable. A lot of the objections that we have come about aesthetics, and these make me chuckle because I think we see some of those in the 2005 comments from the Policy and Resources Committee. And the first thing to say is, of course, it's relative and aesthetics are subjective. But you can imagine a scenario, I suppose, when Corbière Lighthouse was being built and people said, why on earth are you going to put a lighthouse there? It's going to be a expletive eye saucer. And we don't want that there. And then when you explain, of course, the reason it's there is to save lives and to, because progress dictates it. And it turns out being an iconic symbol that we have on our 20p piece, and that it's also a tourist attraction. And I did, I think, leave a comment somewhere on social media about what do they do in the Netherlands. So, I'm sure that their countryside is literally littered with lots of old windmills that no longer are used to make flour for bread anymore. And but you don't see anyone asking for those to be decommissioned or deconstructed. I'm not saying for one moment that a turbine is aesthetically pleasing and that they should remain in the water after they should have been decommissioned, but we'll wait and see in that regard. And I suppose to not be outdone by Deputy Ward, who likes to cite musical references, sometimes quite tenuously, I would have to add, because it's been quite a dry speech up until now. The cultural reference I'm reminded of is that we can't get away from the fact that there are people who just don't like wind farms because they like the status quo, and that there is still an element not just in Jersey society but through the world who just like fossil fuels and they love consumption. And so I'm going to refer to one of my favourite films from 1989, which is called How to Get Ahead in Advertising, starring Richard E. Grant, and there's a couple of nods going on. And just to explain very briefly the premise in the minute that we've got, it's someone who's in advertising has a mental breakdown, and therefore he's got a split personality which manifests itself in a boil on his neck, and he's arguing with it. And the boil calls him a communist. He says, that's a typical communist statement. He says, I'm not a communist. He says, yes, you are. You want to take everyone's car away. And Richard E. Grant says, his character, I don't want to take anything away from anyone. I want to give them a choice of something better. Oh, yes, what? Trains. Trains? They're no good. They're old-fashioned. I hate trains. They're rotten. Only because they don't consume, only because they're already there and they don't eat up more and more. That's why you hate them. That's why government hates them. And that's why they're old-fashioned and rotten. So I think wind farm, great potential. If they're up and running, they can create free energy for us, but let's be realistic.
Thank you, Deputy. Conrad Alverson Brillard.
Thank you, sir, and I'm pleased to follow my colleague in the parish and who would just pick up on his point about Corbière Lighthouse, which is, of course, 150 years old this year. Moving on to the proposed project. So we're not good at big projects. I think we all have to admit to that. We've seen various iterations of big projects come and go. So we must be mindful of the electoral process, which we have to adhere to, and the risks that these processes can have on such a project. I'd be wrong if I weren't to say that I'm sceptical, sir, and for I think many reasons which have been outlined by the public in their various communications. But of course, this is what this proposition is doing, is proposing to answer the scepticism from members of the public. And it's fair to say that we have to consider the insatiable demand for electricity driven by the need of modern technology, and that can't be ignored. We can't bury our heads ostrich-like in the sand and think it's going to go away. I suppose one of my chief reasons for scepticism, sir, is the view from my parish of St. Brelade's on the southwest corner of the island. And while some will say they're pretty, the Aeolians, others would differ. And they will certainly have a more marked impact on the skyline over the Sambrio wind farm, which we presently see in the distance. They'll be higher and closer, so that is inevitable. One question, sir, which remains unanswered, and I hope this proposition, if accepted, will draw that out, will be the commercial benefit to the island. And I think other speakers have mentioned there has to be some benefit for Jersey residents, otherwise why do it? And we need to see that benefit translated actually into their bills at the end of the day, and there may be a future relationship with Jersey Electricity to develop that. The landing of the cable, of course, is a fundamental issue, and we see the cables from France being landed on the east of the island. Once that has been done, and the work in getting the cable ashore obviously is significant, but who knows even where some of these cables come ashore now? The switchgear where they are landed is fairly unobtrusive, so I think as time goes on, that would be lost. And I think it actually is quite an important point, because the necessity for commercial or for electricity independence, I think, would dictate that a landing into Jersey would be of a priority. The fishing industry, as was mentioned by Deputy Curtis, there is important to me. And of course, in the rollout, there will be an effect on the fishing industry, although the area of concern is not heavily fished by Jersey fishermen. But our fishing industry is tenuous, and it doesn't take much to reduce that to nothing, and I'm very conscious of that. And of course, the effect on sea life generally, apart from our fishermen, but sea life generally and the bird life is of great concern. We spend a lot of effort trying to protect our sea life and bird life, so we can't ignore that work we're doing on one side and then create hazards on the other. I'm cognizant, sir, of French activities, which will continue regardless of whether we agree with this or not. I've seen the factory, for want of a better word, in Cherbourg, where certain elements of the Aeolians are built. It's not far away. And those of you who might have caught a condor over to France during the time when they were landing there will have seen that. It's absolutely enormous, and the investment by the French government or the those concerned with the production of those elements is certainly significant. So the other point is, with regard to French activities, we're surrounded. I mean, we've seen them to the southwest off Cherbourg. You only got to drive through France, particularly northern France, where Aeolians are prolific in the fields as one goes up. And I did note the implementation of the Fécamp wind farm. It created much dissent locally. The local newspapers were full of concerns. I suspect it'll settle down, and I think we need to watch what those particular areas do and how they perform and what the results are, so that we can learn from any benefits or disbenefits which may have been created. I do question, sir, on the basis of reports from other places, the financial viability of wind farms. One reads of many differing opinions. There's no doubt about it. Are they successful? Because a failed wind farm will inevitably land back in our laps in Jersey, and do we want that? So we need to have some degree of certainty of the financial probity of whoever picks it up. So the Aeolians are, I suppose, subjective. It was mentioned earlier, in two or three centuries ago, we had lots of windmills. We regard them as pretty now. Only one or two left in Holland. We have none here. Well, we have a water mill operating, but no windmills. So maybe it's something future generations will look to. But we mustn't be naive. And whilst we desperately are independent, we want to remain independent, we risk being isolated if we don't read the room and understand what's going on in the close area around us. So that in conclusion, sir, I feel we have to support the proposition to understand the answers to the questions which we're all asking. So I would urge members to support it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conor Conor St Mary.
Thank you, sir, and I shan't be troubling the timekeeper today. Perhaps I'll begin by thanking the Environment Minister for delaying this proposition in the order of business and for the members for accepting that. This was essentially to allow the chair of the Environment Scrutiny Committee, Deputy Jern, and less importantly myself, to both attend the BIPA conference in Ireland over the last 2 days and to be here when in the closing stages of the debate. Coincidentally, one of the orders of business in the BIPA conference was to receive reports being carried out by, or matters being carried out by its 4 committees, one of which was the Economics Committee, C Committee, of which I am pleased to be a member. Their review over the last year was entitled Government Energy Strategy and Consumer Energy Policy. And if anyone wants it, I'll be pleased to furnish them with a copy of the 40-odd page report. But the recommendation in that report was the government of the BIPA jurisdictions should make it their mission to foster and grow the industries that will transform their economies into net zero economies. For this, they must set clear long-term strategies that encourage investment in renewables, technology and infrastructure by identifying the energy needs of tomorrow. And that did give me the opportunity, not only in the committee meeting we had the previous day, but in the full plenary session, to draw attention to that. And I think it's fair to say that the members of BIPA representing us to do various jurisdictions received that very well, and we're pleased to know that we are taking our obligations seriously. And that, I think, is something to be recognised, that Jersey does play its full part in the international framework of things. And I like to think that that attitude and sentiment will be displayed again in the meeting of the British Irish Council, which I think is due to take place in a month or so. That said, personally and as a member of the Environment Scrutiny Panel, and I think there is to be a review panel strictly set up for this, so I'm not sure about its membership, I do take on board the various concerns and caveats mentioned both by Deputy Jern and Deputy Tadier. This is not an open-ended contract. We are not giving them a blank cheque to carry on ad infinitum without reference to the financial consequences. And I think that was made clear at the presentation given by the Minister to the 2 panels collectively. I'm pleased to hear that the new review panel will have certain safeguards and signposts where they will want updating, and I think that is our, with that in mind, that is the safeguard which I think the members do need to hear. I also fully take on board, and particularly the sentiments expressed by Deputy Balish as to security. That again was a point picked up by the chair of the BIPA committee, noting the problem we did have a couple of years ago. That is very much on our minds, and it's been reflected in other comments as well. So without those caveats, on the basis that the review panel will very much monitor progress and ensure that the Assembly as a whole is kept fully informed, I shall be supporting the proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conor Tarr. Does any other member to speak on the proposition? Conor Tarr will prevail.
Yes, sir, thank you. I've spoken at length about renewables in the past, and I fully support this proposition. I too am worried about where the power is going to be landed. I think that's part of this debate and what's going forward. But I have asked a senior engineer from the JEC when we were debating within the Roads Committee of my parish about the cable access to the new solar array at the north end of St Clement's, or the south of my parish. And I asked him a simple question. I said to him, if every car and every vehicle in the island was electrically powered, and we all had electric heating in our houses and removed all the fossil fuel versions and had air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, how many more cables would we need to bring in from France and from EDF to supply that? He did a bit of research and came back to me and said the answer is 7 new cables. Whether that's true or not, that was his reply. It's my lucky number. It didn't feel particularly lucky at the time because I know that my dear parish is probably going to be where most of it's landed and our roads disrupted for a great deal of time. So I'm glad to hear there is part of this proposition maybe considering landing a cable in St Brellard's perhaps instead, come in through the Corbière Lighthouse, which would be permanently illuminated as a direct result, and also the Foghorn going permanently, which I'm sure Deputy Tadier would absolutely adore. But I really am concerned about that part of this whole debate, and I'm sure the Environment Minister will be dealing with that, but I fully support this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conor Tarb. Does any other member speak on the proposition? Morel.
Thank you, sir. And I must say I'm heartened by listening to the debate this morning. You know, I have read in the media, as many people have, some of the scepticism around the wind farm, and I absolutely hear concerns around the environmental impact. That's absolutely one of the issues that needs to be looked at carefully, and it's something that I see as genuine concern around the wind farm. I understand people's concerns about whether this will help with our energy security or energy independence or not. That is entirely valid. What I don't like, and what I've seen a lot in the paper, is kind of those, often sadly former states members, who just seem to be saying, it's different, it's got something to do with climate change, therefore we don't like it. And that really, you know, that's really sad, because that denies a future for our children. And the reason for that is because primarily, in my view, this isn't about climate change. This isn't about hugely displacing fossil fuels. Though it will have an impact on that, whether we sell it or use it locally, there will be a displacement of fossil fuels. This is primarily about the economy, and this is primarily about helping our island move into the future. And so when I see people just saying, oh, you know, they read a few too many pages of that awful UK newspaper, and they just say, you know, it's bad. They want a culture war. They want something to shout against, and they want something to rail against. And just because it's linked somehow to climate change, but it's not. And so I really want to reassure the Assembly that actually the idea of a wind farm is one that's been generated through the Future Economy Programme. It is there as one of the potential links in the Future Economy Programme. The Future Economy Programme talks about having 5 main areas which affect it. 1 is resilience. Well, this potentially can tick the resilience box. 2 is innovation. This is innovative and will be using the latest technology. 3 is about being skilled. This will offer jobs, about 900 skilled jobs during the construction phase and over 100, 120 thereabouts jobs ongoing after that. Different jobs, different careers for young islanders so that they can think of doing different things in this island and living their whole lives here. It is about fairness. And the Future Economy Programme is about fairness, and this will help deliver higher paying jobs to the island. Yesterday I was asked questions about income inequality. This is, in one small part of that sort of answer, driving new, higher skilled, higher paid jobs into the island. And the 5th and final part of the Future Economy Programme is about being international. And by its very nature, this is international, because to make this work economically, at least some of this energy should be exported, whether it's to the Europe or it could even be to the UK. But it's really important to understand that the real economic benefit comes from that export. We believe this could be up to £300 million added to GVA, over £40 million potential tax take, and that's at prices like 6 pence or 8 pence a unit. So that's not, you know, huge prices, that's not pushing things out. We even believe financially this works at 1 pence a unit. So even if prices were to tumble that far, we believe that this will still work and still create benefit to the island. So I'm really heartened that while some members have reservations, and I understand that the general feeling in the Assembly has been one that, yes, we do need to investigate this further, because, again, this proposition is all about investigation, all about finding out, is this the right way forward? We do know, and I was fortunate to go to Sambria and meet with the developers there, the Prefet there, people who have been involved in the development of the Sambria wind farm. And so there are absolutely ways of engaging the fishing industry, really interesting ways. They can help work on the wind farm. Their boats are useful and can be used in that way entirely. These are not particularly, one of the reasons the area has been chosen to the southwest is they're not particularly fishing grounds that are used. So in that sense, compensation may not be of such importance, but providing new work for fishermen in different ways, that is something that's really interesting as well. We do know, and it was mentioned by Deputy Renouf earlier as well, is the creation of 60 wind turbines creates 60 reefs in the sea. That creates nurseries for fishing grounds. And so there is likely to be a positive environmental benefit as far as marine life is concerned. So there are, and these will be looked at in the round, but I think there are significant benefits around this. So for me, sir, I would just like to say I wholeheartedly support this. We as an Assembly really, really need to understand the challenges that lie ahead of us. And those challenges mean that we can't act as Deputy Tadia was referring to back in 2005, where we kind of dodged that and, you know, perhaps timidity stopped the States Assembly of the day, though, like Deputy Tadia, I wasn't following the debate, from taking this step forward. We're not in a position where we can be timid anymore. Our economic situation requires us to be bold. We cannot be timid. Our economic situation requires us to find solutions so that young people can choose to live their lives in Jersey, because if they don't, then older generations will not get the health and social care that they need. That's the situation we're in. If we choose to be timid, then we fail this island. Now is the time for being bold. And whilst I accept 60 wind turbines off the south coast of Jersey is quite bold, I also said, as I said to the media recently, they're also temporary, unlike Corbière Lighthouse, unlike Elizabeth Castle, unlike Montorgueil. These were big engineering projects of their day, and they're here 400, 500 years later, 150 years in the case of Corbière Lighthouse. They're not going anywhere. And I imagine if you ask the islanders of the day, the St. Brelard parishioners of the day, what they thought when they looked out at Elizabeth Castle being constructed in St. Albans Bay, they were probably not too pleased themselves. They wouldn't have had any planning committee back then. They would have just had to deal with it. But, you know, 400 or 500 years later, Elizabeth Castle is still there. 400 or 500 years, in fact, 40 or 50 years, the entire wind farm could be dismantled and taken away. It is temporary, so we are not talking about permanently putting something in the view of the island. Armora Crescent was seen back in the 1850s as being a blight on the landscape of St. Helier. Armora Crescent is now much loved by people in this island as a great and classic example of fine Victorian architecture. So, sir, I, like many people in this Assembly, do want the Environment Minister to take this forward. For me, as I've said, this ticks 5 boxes: resilience, innovative, skilled, fair and international, or the Future Economy Programme. I think it is through an economic lens this wind farm is best looked and observed. I think to look at it purely through an environmental lens would be a mistake, because that is not where the majority of benefits will be gained. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. If no other member wishes to speak, Chief Minister.
On the grounds the Environment Minister isn't in the Assembly, so I'll say a few words, because they will be quick, because most important areas have been covered in some of the very good speeches we've had today. And I wanted to start by thanking the Environment Minister for his opening speech, which I think was balanced and reassuring and sought to deal with a lot of the speculation that was in play. And it confirmed that this is indeed a fact-finding mission, so we can make an informed decision. And this Assembly, and I'm one of those people, sir, And islanders will need some persuasion. They will need to see evidence. They will need and expect to see a properly constructed, detailed process that puts us in a position at some time in the future to make a decision, sir, which I believe decisions should always be based upon evidence, good facts, as well as innovation, as a former speaker spoke about. So I couldn't help but think it's quite funny, isn't it, that he spoke about Elizabeth Castle, which is one of our great landmarks. You'd never get planning permission for that today, sir. But I'm pleased we probably didn't need it when it was built. But it is a point that new structures are controversial, can also become an acceptable and valued a part of our landscapes. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that wind turbines will fall into that category, because I agree with Deputy Scott. I think they are mechanical industrial equipment, and I'm glad to hear, because the former Environment Minister, Deputy Rennes, knows about my concerns on around the marine environment, and research now is improving technology on the wind turbines to reduce impact on mammals, especially bird strikes. This was made more, I think, attractive to members and ministers as an economic prospect when we started to receive indications from our financial and economic officials, and we started to see the potential for income. So I think that took the appetite up for the government to say, right, this needs more careful consideration. And members may have seen a letter sent from the French government to the Minister for the Environment, which explained their position. It outlined very briefly their plans and confirmed, as previous speakers have said, that wind generation is going to be a crucial part of their grid security in the future, and they will be investing in it. But careful and considered conversations are needed with the French and our other European neighbours as part of the work we will do on the back of this proposition is successful, sir. And to do that with credibility, we need the permission and the support of the Assembly, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Minister. No other member wishes to speak. Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. It feels like the debate may be rounding up soon, and I wanted to take the opportunity to be clear about Reform Jersey's position on this proposition and the future of it. So, of course, we'll be voting in support of this proposition and hope that there is a very resounding majority from the Assembly in support of it, because of the signal that would send out to the public and also to those who would be actively involved in helping to deliver a wind farm, that it's a safe bet to get involved in and won't be subject to the kinds of political difficulties that we've seen in other projects, the hospital obviously being a key one there, and to know that it's a safe bet to get involved in, and that the different wings of politics in Jersey are supportive of the concepts, and so it's worth engaging without worrying about a future U-turn on it as a project. And that certainly won't be the case from Reform Jersey, who are committed to the island benefiting from the opportunities arising from renewable energy, including a wind farm. If there is only a slim majority in support of it, that would, I think, risk putting off people and organisations from wanting to involve themselves in that, because of the loss that they could suffer if there was a U-turn on it in future. So to be clear on that, sir, we are committed to this, and that the long-term project is one we would wish to support. But sir, not at any cost, and this is, unfortunately, is where I have to be negative about the proposition and the background to it, which is that I think that in bringing the proposition, a huge opportunity was missed to set out what the vision for renewable energy in Jersey ought to actually be, what benefits for the public that they could expect to enjoy from it, and bring people with us. Where instead, sir, it feels like, because of that lack of vision and explanation for how this could be formed, we have allowed space for those who wish to argue against this. Some, sir, from positions that I don't consider to be legitimate, and by that I mean the climate change deniers, whose perspective on this issue I think is as valuable as the Flat Earth Society's perspective in geography matters, because they are wrong on the science underpinning this. By allowing space for that, we will undermine confidence in the public and raise scepticism among them that will put them off potentially benefiting from something in the future. So there was a comment previously by the former minister who lodged this proposition about his preference for landing the cable from the wind farm in Jersey. So why is that not in the wording of the proposition to ask us to agree to that? Because of the confidence that that would have given to somebody like myself, who's very interested in the island benefiting from greater independence of energy. I got the impression from Deputy Balash that that was something he was concerned about too, but is not in the proposition. Nothing in it at all to stipulate that the purpose very specifically of this ought to be for islanders to maximise the benefit that they feel in their energy prices and investment that comes as a result of it. And as it's worded, sir, it is possible that we could do as little as simply lease a bit of our seabed to some multinational that has no loyalty to Jersey, no interest in letting the economic benefits filter here, and in fact could potentially even use it as an opportunity to offset their tax liabilities on other projects that they're involved in. Something, sir, that would end up as Jersey providing a net disbenefit to the world if we were to do that. So if that is the project that ends up arising as a result of this, that ought to be something we say no to, because this ought to be primarily focused on Jersey experiencing a just transition when it comes to carbon neutrality and enhancing the development of renewable energy on the island, and the impacts that will have on energy bills. So if we were to go to the public with this proposition and be clearer in outlining to them how they will benefit, I think we would have provided more confidence to them and not provided the space for those who I think have slightly more nefarious ideologies underpinning their opposition to this to take ground. And that's a huge mistake, I think, that was made at the outset of lodging this proposition. But so we can still be comfortable to vote for it, because ultimately this Assembly, and in fact this government, won't be the ones who hold office at the moment where the final decisions need to be made. Those will come several years from now, and I would have thought even after the next election. So it will be a future Assembly, future government, and future determination by the public to ultimately shape what happens there. And so that's why I think it's important for us to state as a party that our ambition for renewable energy and for an offshore wind farm in Jersey would exclusively be one that is based on maximising the benefit to the public, including on energy bills and energy security and greater independence, and that we would rule out politically spending time and money on looking at a project that ultimately serves little other than to provide a nice opportunity to make money for a multinational company with no loyalty to Jersey. And I think in being clearer about that vision and ambition, I think we would have probably inspired more confidence by the public behind this proposition. But ultimately, we still need to be positive about it, because it does present a hugely exciting way forward. And I hope the Assembly will adopt it by a large majority so that we can get on with that.
Thank you, Deputy. If no other members to speak, I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Thank you, sir. So this is a project of real potential significance for the future of our island, and I'm grateful to all states members. I know this debate hasn't gone on for maybe as long as it might have done, but to me every contribution that we've had today has been absolutely valid. For once, sir, I think potentially we've had members have managed to make somewhere in the region of 15 speeches without any repetition, which is something to be really grateful for. But in all seriousness, what a good debate we've had. and I'm glad we've had the benefit of the proper debate at this early stage and with the benefit of first-hand understanding of many islanders' views. We've had some clear direction from states members here, and I'm pleased that everyone has realised that there are still many questions to answer and that these will only come after the next stage of work. I hope members have heard my clear commitment that I have listened and that I, along with the Minister for Economic Development and other ministers, intend to take forward this work in the interests of all islanders, both those in favour and those against. And I thank them all for taking time to engage with the consultation. I also want to be clear that I do not see a rush to do the initial stages of this work because we need time to do things correctly and thoughtfully, and we need to find the answers necessary to the next round of questions. We will publish a timeline of further work that will allow scrutiny to engage in, consider, and contribute to all the issues in order that we can move forward together. This is in line with the request from scrutiny that I've already confirmed with them. We, that is the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development and myself, look forward to working with scrutiny if members adopt this proposition. This consensus approach is vital to give a project like this firm foundations and to give islanders and potential investors and developers confidence should we reach that stage. In doing the work to get this far, the previous minister's work on the proposition, and I thank him for it, along with his officers and myself, have spoken and taken thoughts from a broad range of interested and hugely knowledgeable parties. These include the UK, most especially the French government, Crown Estate, members of the states of Guernsey, and potential developers and investors, among many others. If we move forward with this project, I commit to continued working with all these parties, but most especially our French neighbours and cousins, who will be so vital to any successful outcome. Indeed, just recently, I've also held separate meetings with the Dutch and Swiss ambassadors, and they both initiated thoughts and personally contributed ideas on how Jersey might benefit from generating renewable energy. In taking all these soundings, I have concluded two things. First, many knowledgeable and experienced people believe there is a real commercial opportunity here in Jersey. With the right thinking, engagement and decision-making, a project could be structured to benefit islanders and minimise risk in ways we can potentially choose for ourselves. This external reality check tells me that closing the door at this stage would be an opportunity missed for Jersey. Second, I've concluded that our open collaboration approach is the right one and that we can't and shouldn't move forward alone. Structured, appropriate expertise and insight at the next steps are critical to bringing evidence-based decisions forward for consideration in this Assembly. I can assure States members that I intend to work with the whole team involved in this project, together with all other interested parties, those for and those against, to bring forward the best and broadest range of evidence to base decisions upon. I'd like, sir, now to just address the speakers that have contributed so well to this debate, if members might allow me a few minutes to do so. We started with Deputy Ward, Minister for Education, who spoke about the best time being 20 years ago. And he may be right, but there is a significant difference between wind farm development 20 years ago and wind farm development today, and that is one word: subsidies. The technology now of wind farm development allows us to produce energy at the same cost or cheaper than the equivalent fossil fuel energy. At the moment, that would be natural gas would be the cheapest way to do it. And that is the significant difference in this, that it could well be that should we choose to build a wind farm, ours could be the first built without subsidy. So potentially Deputy Ward could be right, but also now could be the time to make that change. I thank the chairman of my scrutiny panel, and I just want to say to her, yes, we're going to work with you on this, work alongside you, and we look forward to working together. She made a good point. We have a legal obligation. We have treaty obligations that we're signed up to, and she highlighted the fact that some members of the public across Europe are taking their governments to task for not doing more. Deputy Doublé, absolutely, young people, the effects on this project potentially affects the younger generation far more than it does the old. It's going to be 10 years in the building if we go forward. And I think back to a small story from a 9-year-old who was consulted on this, who commented, and I don't know, very thoughtful 9-year-old, who said, potentially these wind farms might be gone in 30 years. And that young 9-year-old was absolutely right. They may not have to look at wind farms in the future. Deputy Balash mentioned that the report was a bit thin. That's his opinion, but he's right to stress the word strategic. And I can say to him, the decision on landing the cable in France, in Jersey, the combination of the two, has not been made yet. This is some of the information we're going to seek and come up with the answers. But if security is a big thing for members, and it may well be when we make that final decision, there's every opportunity to land this cable in Jersey, and my hope would be in 10 years' time that battery technology will allow us to store enough power so that even if the wind was not blowing for a day or two, that sustainable energy that we create is still used to power homes and businesses in Jersey, and that would be true energy security. The other thing I would say to the Deputy is that the legislation that we will develop for the leasing of the seabed will come back. It will be given to scrutiny. It will come back to this Assembly. The framework which will allow us to lease the seabed to potential developers will be in our grasp to develop. And that's work that I look forward to working with the Deputy and all other deputies on in the future should we move forward. Deputy Renouf spoke about the potential, and he spoke about the future costs. He spoke about the potential positive for the fishing industry, and he spoke about vision. And I thank him, sir, because it was him and his team that first brought this proposition to the Assembly, and I continue to look forward to having his input and working with him on this project into the future. Deputy Scott quite rightly mentioned the increased energy requirement, and if we got rid of every fossil fuel burning machine and boiler on this island, our reliance on electricity would double. So it is very, very important that we look at opportunities to create our own electricity. The Constable of St Saviour's talked about landing power in Jersey, but I would say to him, and again, this is an answer that we will get from the detailed work, landing a power cable from an offshore wind is not going to be the same as landing a power cable that comes straight from France. There will be considerable infrastructure required on land in order to facilitate that. But again, this is work that needs to be done, and we need to see where that power cable might come ashore. Deputy Catherine Curtis spoke about three things, and I agree with her entirely. Compensation for fishing. We will need to look at ways to help our fishermen through these challenges as wind farms continue to take small areas, because they are small by the time they're finished, but take areas out of their fishing zones that they can no longer fish in, dredging particularly being one of those. The Deputy spoke about public investment, and if I have to say to members that there was one surprise from the consultation, it was the surprise that I had of the level of public interest in investing their own money in this wind project. I thought they might not want to do that, but there was a number of people that suggested they might like to invest, and that's something that can be looked at. And then, of course, the Deputy mentioned environmental impact, and, of course, the impact assessment that will be done will have to conform with all international standards, and will be a substantial piece of work. Deputy Tadier mentioned 20 years ago as well, and he mentioned the Rance barrage and the local benefit to the French economy. And I couldn't agree more. I think that the tidal power is a potential source of energy in the future without doubt. It's a disappointment to many of us that the technology hasn't come on at the speed that we had hoped. Members will know that the Port of Cherbourg saw some very heavy development many years ago now, purely with tidal power in mind. That infrastructure has been converted to be used for wind farm technology. But I'm sure in the future tidal power will be something and somewhere we will go. But it may be that it takes a number of decades to get to commercialisation. Deputy Tadier talked about the local benefit. I'll come back to that. He talked about prioritising those benefits, looking at the risks, and what is the real driver for this. And of course, that will be the answers that will come out of the work. Is it just to make money, so, as some have said? Is this about creating sustainable energy to reduce carbon? Or is this about security for our energy on the island? The Constable of St Blards, my assistant minister, said he was sceptical. And some members may have thought, well, here's the alarm bells ringing. But I thank the Constable because he keeps me challenged. He asks me questions. He asks the team questions, quite rightly. And he keeps that side of the argument going so that we don't get ahead of ourselves. And I'm grateful, and I thank him for that. And I ask him to continue to do that because all sides of the argument need to be heard. Constable of St Mary's spoke about the British Irish Parliament and the projects that he and Deputy Jeune have been involved with when they've been away in the last couple of days. And he spoke about taking our obligation seriously. I've mentioned that, but I would reiterate, and he said it in his speech, this project is not fait accompli. The big decisions are yet to be made. Constable of Greville mentioned landing and the number of cables that we might need if we were all electric tomorrow. I'm not sure about that, but again, I mentioned that landing cables in Jersey is something we will look at very seriously because there are significant infrastructure implications. I thank the Economic Development Minister and the Chief Minister for giving me an opportunity to step out of the room for 5 minutes, which I was very grateful for. But of course, I would move forward and say that I have always said to the Minister for Sustainable Economy that should this go through today, it will be a joint project between him and I. I don't know, in answer to Deputy Tadier, who will be the official lead, but members can be assured this is not just a project about the environment, it's not just a project about the economy. This is a project about all facets of Jersey life, and I look forward to working specifically with the Chief Minister, Economic Development Minister in the future. And I would hope that ministers that take our places in the future will continue that work as well, because this is a long-term project. Finally, the Minister for Housing spoke about the economic opportunity and how a good majority in this debate vote is important, and he is absolutely right. It is important that people who are looking to Jersey, and there are a number of them, significant developers and investors, it's important that they see a clear indication from this Assembly that we are committed to having a serious, really serious look at whether this project has enough benefits from the island. It's really important that we get the vote today. But the Minister did stress that he was disappointed that there wasn't enough specifics in the proposition, and this is the conundrum. Between the rock and the hard place, what did we do? Make a number of decisions before we came here today? Make a decision that we were definitely going to land the power in Jersey? Make a decision about how many turbines? It was really difficult. What we wanted to do was to come forward with some very broad generalisations, and I know that may not please everybody, but this is what today is about, moving forward to get those detailed answers. The Deputy spoke about landing the cable again, and he spoke about vision, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute, sir. I want to talk briefly about economic concerns, because I understand the concerns that have been expressed over the environmental impact of developing and operating, and most importantly, decommissioning a wind farm. All of the energy we use, be it fossil fuels or nuclear or hydro, it all has environmental impact to a greater or lesser extent. But I have to say to members that by far the greatest threat to biodiversity and wildlife is climate change. However, I remind members that the environmental impact of any Jersey projects will be regulated by a law that this Assembly will debate and approve. Together, we can ensure that any development in our waters will meet the highest standards, standards that account and mitigate for evidenced and identified environmental impact. As technology and understanding progresses, the impact of projects in the most suitable locations can be mitigated and minimised. This is something that is in our hands as the future regulator of any project. I'd like to talk about the visual aspect. For some people, clearly, they find the visual impact of turbines unappealing. And obviously, this is more of an issue for islanders that have to look at them more often. Other islanders have said that they see them as symbols of the future and a statement about our commitment to a sustainable future and a commitment to clean energy. I hope that those that find them obtrusive will take some comfort in the fact that it is the impact assessment process established in law by this Assembly that will make sure that the design, layout and technical solutions are used to minimise the impact from important views. But clearly, the turbines cannot be hidden. On many days, turbines in a Jersey wind farm will be highly visible, just as the turbines in the Sambriac array are highly visible. And in the same way, we should expect further wind farm developments neighbouring our island to be highly visible in certain conditions. Our horizon has already changed, but not necessarily forever. Wind power may, in practice, only form a part of our long-term global energy transition. A Jersey wind farm may last in the region of 3 decades before it gives way to newer and currently emerging technologies. A life cycle quite possibly significantly shorter than that of Rocco Tower and Corbier Lighthouse, other man-made structures familiar to our sunset horizon. I'd like to speak briefly about fishing. It's a subject very close to my heart, and I recognise that there will be challenges for maritime users like fishers. But again, I commit to working these through with them as part of the next steps. Other schemes in the world have developed ways of working alongside traditional maritime users, allowing them to return to the area once construction is completed. With engagement and constructive discussion, I can see solutions for both Jersey and French fishermen where perhaps others might see problems. I and other ministers will listen to the points raised, and if the proposition is supported, we'll give them careful consideration as we plan how to move forward. Let me remind members, sir, this proposition does not commit us to building a wind farm. It does not commit us to excessive expenditure beyond what is already in agreed budgets. It does not bind us to any relationships with third parties, other than agreeing the location and an approximate cap on the size of the development. We can agree the proposition today and keep all the other doors open. Finally, sir, in conclusion, I would like to finish on a note of optimism, if I may. This, if it goes ahead, is a big project for our island, but it brings big opportunities and big challenges. We can expect to be working with big partners, those whose financial resources far outweigh those of our own. But looking into the future that becomes increasingly uncertain and in which we know lie big challenges, I think this is exactly the scale of project we need to be giving careful and level-headed consideration to. Perhaps the most significant finding of the public consultation was that some of our islanders already fear that, together, we cannot make this work. But I do not believe that. I believe that our small island community has on many occasions achieved big things. We have over many centuries punched above our weight, and we have the opportunity here to do the same again. I'm not sure where or how we allowed ourselves to lose confidence in our ability, but in this project we have the chance to put that right, to be proud of our island and the tasks we accomplish. Although we may still choose not to go down this route, I believe that if we want to, we can. We can structure a project that will bring the most benefits to the island, and we have the ability to choose the right, experienced partners to work with. If we do go ahead, we can make a success of this. Whether you want energy security, or you want to play your part in producing sustainable energy, or if you just want to help start a project that creates jobs on the island and puts money into the exchequer, there is, I am sure, something for you in this project. However, we will not know for sure unless we press on to the next stage. Sir, as I said yesterday afternoon, this project is not about me or the previous minister. It's not about the ministers for the environment and economic development, or the council of ministers, or government, or scrutiny, or the States Assembly. It is about islanders and everyone who lives here in Jersey, most especially the younger ones. However, it is here in this assembly today that we members have a responsibility for deciding to move forward on this project, deciding to move to the next stage on behalf of everyone else. We know from the consultation that there is interest, much interest, in pressing ahead to find those important answers. I believe that those answers will show that there is a future for a wind farm here in Jersey, a project that can help to do our bit to save carbon, a project that can provide energy security for our wonderful island in the future, a project that will provide much needed income for our treasury, income to help the future states do more for future islanders. So this is not about today or tomorrow or next week, next month or next year. This is about looking into the future 10 years from now and being confident in our decision making. With that note of hope, and having listened closely to members' views, and with much work still to do in front of us, I ask members to take the decision to move to that next stage. And by the next stage, I want to be clear again that a vote to support this amendment is not a vote today to build a wind farm, but is a vote that shows confidence in what might be, to see what the future could hold. I ask members to vote in favour of this proposition, sir, and I call for the appel.
Thank you, Minister. The appel has been called for. I invite members to return to their seats and ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have the chance to cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. I announce that the proposition has been adopted. 40 votes for, 1 vote contra, and no abstentions.
The member voting contra, Deputy Andrews.
That concludes public business for this meeting. I invite the Vice Chair of PPC to propose the arrangement of public business for future meetings. Vice Chair.
Thank you, sir. There's been one change to future business as published on the consolidated order paper. That is the addition of P22 2024 Strategic Reserve Fund long-term funding plan, which has been lodged today and listed for the meeting on the 21st of May. There is not a huge amount of business scheduled for the meeting on the 30th of April, but members should nevertheless have the continuation days in their diary. Excuse me. It may be worth highlighting that there are two significant debates scheduled for the following meeting on the 21st of May, which is the Common Strategic Policy and the Assisted Dying Proposition. And with that, sir, I propose the arrangement on public business for future meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that proposal seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the proposal? No. Are members content now to adjourn? In that case, the Assembly is adjourned until 9:30 on Tuesday, the 30th of April.